Hi learners, welcome to yet another video in the series on History of English Literature. Today, this is the 7th video in this series, so make sure you have watched the previous ones as well for a complete preparation for your exams. Let's get started. First of all, the name, the Caroline Age. Now this Caroline Age in England refers to the period during the reign of King Charles I from 1625 to 1649. This era gets its name from the Latin version of the name Charles, which is actually Carolus. This is why the name Caroline. From Carolus comes Caroline. We'll start with some historical context first, like always. Now, Charles I came to the throne after the death of his father, King James I. We talked about his reign, that is the reign of James I, in the previous video on the Jacobean age. James had already started a difficult relationship with the parliament, but under Charles, things got much worse. Charles believed in the divine right of the kings. What's that? The idea that monarchs were chosen by God and they did not have to answer to anyone else, including the parliament. I mean, can you imagine the kind of person he must have been? Now, this belief of Charles led to his collision with the parliament, which wanted more influence over how the country was governed, especially regarding taxes and the finances. So, early in the reign of Charles I, he dissolved the parliament several times when the parliament refused to give him money. So, parliament dissolved kar diya. From 1629 to 1640, Charles ruled without parliament altogether in a period known as the personal rule or the 11 years tyranny. During this time, he raised funds through questionable means like forced loans and ship money. What was that? Now, ship money was a tax that was usually only collected in coastal towns for naval defense, but then it was extended to the entire country, meaning that people living near the seas in coastal areas, they had to pay taxes to the crown so that the crown can protect the people in case of any attacks through the sea route. But Charles, he extended this tax to the entire nation. This was deeply unpopular and it caused widespread resentment. Religious conflict also played a major role in the Caroline Age. See, Charles was married to a Catholic, Henrietta Maria of France, and this alarmed many of his Protestant subjects because remember, at this time, England was officially Protestant and Catholics were viewed with suspicion. Again, recall the previous lectures. Henry VIII had broken away from the Catholic Church and he had established the Church of England. Remember that? We talked about this before, like I said, during the Age of Revival and all. That's why I keep saying that do watch the previous videos first. Alright, so remember that during the time of Charles I, England was officially Protestant and Catholics were viewed with suspicion. And then we have Charles who was marrying a Catholic, Henrietta. So all these things combined together, all this political and religious strife eventually led to the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1642. You have to remember the years, they are important ones. On one side we had the Royalists or the Cavaliers and they supported Charles. And on the other we had the parliamentarians or the Roundheads who opposed his rule. Okay. This war went on for several years and by 1646 Charles had been captured. After a brief escape and further conflict, Charles was put on trial. He was found guilty of treason and he was executed in 1649. I mean, can you imagine a king being found guilty of treason and then he is being eventually executed? It was in fact the first time that a reigning monarch was executed. Imagine. This marked the end of the Caroline Age, right? And now let's talk about the literature during this period. The Caroline Age saw the emergence of a group of poets known as the Cavalier poets. These writers were generally royalists. Royalist meant they supported Charles I and they wrote poetry that celebrated the courtly life, love and loyalty. They were known for their elegant and polished verse and they would often, this poetry that would often focus on themes of honor, beauty and loyalty to the crown. The most famous of the Cavalier poets was Robert Herrick, and apart from him we have Richard Lovelace and Sir John Suckling. Do note these names down for the exams as well, because they do ask this in the paper. In fact, there are so many more such groups and movements which you must study for your exams. I take up all these movements and groups in my online course. Just visit my website theankitajain.com to access the complete list of the movements that you need to prepare in case you are preparing on your own, or you can enroll in my course if you want to get access to the complete study material. Now, coming back to one of the Cavalier poets that I mentioned, Robert Herrick, one of the most important ones. He is perhaps best remembered for his famous poem To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. This poem, with its famous line, "Gather your rosebuds while you may," this reflects the Cavalier poet's focus on the theme of carpe diem. Again, beautiful phrase, carpe diem, that is seizing the day and enjoying life even in the face of political uncertainty. Okay, Richard Lovelace was another prominent Cavalier poet who is best known for his poem To Lucasta, Going to the Wars. This poem reflects the conflict between love and duty as the speaker bids farewell to his lover to go fight in the Civil War. Alright. In contrast to the Cavalier poets were the metaphysical poets who were also active during the Caroline age. I have already talked about metaphysical poetry in my previous video on the Jacobean age. So I suggest that you watch that if you are interested in learning more about this particular topic on the metaphysical poets. That's going to help you. Remember that the most famous metaphysical poet has to be John Donne, like such a beautiful writer, okay? Though much of his work was written before the Caroline age, remember that as well. However, his influence was strongly felt by later poets like George Herbert and Andrew Marvell. George Herbert was a clergyman who wrote deeply religious poetry that explored the relationship between humans and God. His collection titled The Temple, that was published in 1633, and it's full of spiritual reflections and meditations on faith. Herbert's poetry, unlike the worldly themes of the Cavalier poets, that was more focused on the inner life and spiritual devotion. Then another writer I mentioned, Andrew Marvell, who's another important metaphysical poet, he kind of bridged the gap between the Cavalier and the metaphysical traditions. His poetry, the famous one, To His Coy Mistress, like such a beautiful famous lines, the opening lines, okay? That combined wit and elegance of the Cavaliers with the intellectual depth of the metaphysical poets. Marvell was somebody who was also politically engaged, and he wrote several poems and pamphlets that reflected the political struggles of the Caroline age, particularly his concerns about monarchy and the freedom. Now that we have talked about the poetry part, let's talk about the drama during this period. So we had dramatists like John Ford and James Shirley. John Ford's plays such as It's Pity She's a Whore, that dealt with themes of forbidden love, violence and social corruption, reflecting the darker side of the age. James Shirley, another writer, another dramatist, he wrote numerous comedies and tragedies, and he was in fact one of the last great playwrights before the closing of the theatres in 1642 due to the Civil War. Now here, do note this fact down that theatres were closed in 1642 during the period of Civil War and the interregnum, something that we will take up in the next video, alright? And theatres, they were reopened only in 1660 with the restoration of Charles II, and that is why there aren't many famous plays or playwrights during this particular era, something that you should remember. Remember, there is more to this age, and in case you are preparing on your own, I suggest that you do check out my website theankitajain.com to access the list of writers. In my online course though, I discuss everything that is relevant from the exam point of view. So if you want, you can enroll in the course as well, where you get detailed lectures, summaries and chronologies and so much more, apart from my constant guidance and support, of course, like that goes without saying. If you're interested and want to know more about it, feel free to call or text me on the number shown above on the screen and also in the description box. Also, do not forget to subscribe and click that bell icon so that you never miss a video. If you want to get in touch with me, follow me on Instagram and Facebook. If you want to access some free material, then you have to download my app, and you can also join my Telegram channel for some free PDFs and quizzes. Also, do let me know down in the comments below how you are liking this particular series so far and what else you would like me to make a video on once this particular series is complete. On that note, I'll take your leave and see you again soon in the next video. Keep learning and I'll see you in the next one.